This is the break of our second class of a 3-week series on Maya and its Evolutes. And we have reached, in the original chart, more than halfway and studied not only the 10 characteristics of Maya and the whole, you might call, process of rebirth and what's beyond it, transmigration, which is, and what's beyond transmigration. But we also have made our way towards this chart on the 3 eternal gateways, which we called Adharma, Dharma, and Swadharma. Your Swadharma is your highest destiny, if you want to use that word in this context. The great souls would come here to Earth with Swadharma already well understood and is a part of their embodiment and their work of raising beings to the highest consciousness, level of consciousness. And the Dharmis, or people who are practicing Dharma, are taking the teachings and perfecting themselves, like polishing their gem, the facets of their gem. Adharma, and you can see a lot listed under that on the chart, is of course what's against the Dharma. Krishna mentions that in the Gita quite often, and the problems that it causes. So you could say, to make the connections, Maya is really in full operation in this umbrella and of a Dharma and all the beings who are collected under that umbrella. This is basically moving along with the 7 malas, and most of them unaware of the 10 characteristics of Maya. What to speak of Maya as a potential problem in their life, or something that if you could somehow observe it and it would go away, then all of a sudden the result of that would be feeling fine all the time, feeling yourself. Not just happiness, but content. Not just content, but peace of mind. And not just that, but maybe even opening a higher doorway to Swadharma, the real reason why you've been taking birth, which is not just perfecting your gem, polishing your gem as in Dharma, Dharmic life, but realizing that you are the gem of perfection. Like the Zen koan we like, of the many Zen koans we've all looked at, basically is the woodcutter suddenly realized he was a diamond cutter. So the implications of that is you're just involved in your everyday life, your profession and all that, when you've got some Dharma going on, all of a sudden you realize the innate perfection of your soul, your Atman, or your Buddha nature. And that comes about suddenly as if by the grace on high, or deep within you. But that, of course, is this sweet that once started off maybe as sour, but Maya is something that seems sweet in the beginning and turns sour later, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. And you can see all of this that people attach to under the category of Adharma, this first eternal gateway. Now it's interesting to note, but it isn't hard to convince a person or people about the fact that Adharma is an internal gateway. It's something that's going on all the time. And nobody's been able to stop that. Not even the Avatar, pouring all his life force with the ocean of Dharma into the hearts and minds and souls of people who've ever been able to stop Maya from operating on this world particularly, but of course in all worlds too. It just gets finer and finer, Maya, just like the elements get finer and turn into tanmatras, and the senses get finer and turn into the dream senses, and everything gets a refined involutionary direction in spiritual life that allows you to go back to your source of origin. But Adharma is an eternal gateway too, just like Maya is eternal and is illusory at the same time and is insentient the same time as that. If you just studied those first 3 characteristics of Maya, it would be very informative for you to think about covering power and distorting power and the suffering that is caused by those two Shaktis, and ended with Prakasha Shakti, then you would understand more about how people continually suffer and don't seek relief. There is suffering, there's a cause for suffering, there's a way out, and then there's the Eightfold Path that leads you out. Right perspective being a very important part of that. So you could say that all four of these listings under Adharma are prevalent among the millions and billions of souls who are suffering under the regime of Maya and who are following the eternal gateway lifetime after lifetime of Adharma. What's against truth? What's against righteousness? What's against common sense? Causing an insane condition amongst people in this world. And many of us complain about that, but very few of us know that there's a solution to it, starting from the fact that if you recognize Maya, it will go away. That puts you in an enlightened position. So then all of a sudden it takes you out of the city of materialism and fundamentalism and secularism and religious convention, which are these four things under the gate, and puts you in the gateway of Dharma, and you walk the path and get free. It's just a matter of time then, and from then you're enjoying the journey. Your enjoyment beyond suffering and pleasure. It's a kind of exquisite enjoyment you're getting out of finalizing your business here. So you realize it's coming to an end. It's sort of like a bad job. You see, I can hardly wait till next month when this gets over, you see. Waking up out of Maya, out of Adharma into Dharma is like that. All of a sudden you're just days away from freedom, from this heavy weight you've been carrying. So it happens to people in everyday life, but in spiritual life it's a very rare of occurrence. That's why Krishna says in the Gita, of 1,000 beings say, only one tries to know me in truth. Of 1,000 of those who try, only one comes to know me in truth and get enlightenment. So thousands and thousands of beings are laboring under these four pathways. So there you see them, Lokayatika Marga. And this is a teaching that I've gathered. You can't find it anywhere in this form. So it was gathered because there are Sanskrit words for it. And I saw them and saw that they applied to the different runs of people, of embodied souls, inside of the Adharma pathway. And it's nice to put it that way because then you see why people keep reliving this life of suffering over and over again, why rebirth happens in ignorance and why suffering is. It's an answer, in part at least, to an unanswerable question that even the seers won't try and answer for you in most cases. So Dharma and high philosophy has, at least in India, has these answers and these solutions. The answer would be so to stimulate you to get busy and do practice, and the solution would be the attainment. And then you're back to your normal state of consciousness. I wrote that just this morning to a student who wrote to me, and told her that's just what we call natural, spontaneous life, when you intensify your sadhana and get free. And sadhana then becomes a part of your everyday operations. It's just what you do to maintain that sattvic state of mind that you came upon. Some people stumble upon it, other people come upon it, some people initiate it and seek it and attain it. They know all the dynamics to it. So Lokayatika Marga is materialism. And it's mentioned in the scriptures. I came upon it just the other day in the yoga commentaries. Lokayatika. And we could say that materialism, there's one darshana in India for it. Charvaka it's called. So they've allowed one darshana in India of a so-called realized being who preaches that materialism is the purpose of life. So the seers look back at that and they probably tongue-in-cheek, mention it, but they've allowed it to be one of the darshanas to include everything. Of course, if you study Charvaka, you'll find out that it's not a materialism devoid of divine reality. Who would ever think of something like that? Have to be the most demented souls that would rob matter of God, when matter might not be God, but without God, matter wouldn't be there. And we know that without matter, God is there. And however you want to call God, form with form or formlessness. The next doorway, because remember the eternal gateways have these two listings under them. We're looking right now at the 4 veiled doorways. What does veiled remind you of that we just studied in the first half? Yeah, the Vijay Shakti, the veiling power. So Mitjigyan Marg, fundamentalism, I've assigned that term there, is that my watch keeps the only right time, everyone else's is false kind of illusion that Sri Ramakrishna mentioned about in terms of people who are following a very narrow scope of thinking and path that lets everyone out the gate except what they believe. So it's a kind of path of narrow fundamentalism which is based on a false premise. Mithya, we mentioned that word in the first half. False premise that everything else out there is false and their way of thinking is all false, and I've got the only way of thinking that's correct or right. And that happens a lot around religion. We know that religions will fight against each other even for the sake of who's right and who's wrong. Pravritti marg is secularism. So again, you've heard the teaching of nivritti and pravritti as a nice duality there in Maya, we might say, which explains the nature of those who prefer enlightenment and those who prefer the world. And a kind of practicalism, practicality is secularism that one has to adopt in order to earn their living and make their way in this world. So its problem is that, of course, it veils again the truth of divine reality and the spontaneity of bliss and the gaining of peace of mind. You need peace of mind first and foremost, as Holy Mother said. And then you have Bahutva Marg, which is religious convention, and also very connected, of course, to this idea of fundamentalism. Those two paths can be connected. Bahutva Marg speaking particularly about religion and how mundane human convention gets bred by following that path. Whereas, on the other hand, like in Sri Ramakrishna's case, that he loved all religions and had visions of some of the deities of the other religions, like Muhammad and Moses and so forth. So he knew that and he practiced, even though he was a Hindu, for a while he practiced the Muslim religion and took all the Hindu pictures out of his room and ate with the Muslims in the Muslim quarter and all the things that Hindus wouldn't do without losing their caste and going against the laws of whatever path they were following. And probably narrowness was one of them, because we know religion can be very narrow too, and only include those who are are believers and exclude all of those who are other, them and us kind of ideation. So Bahutva Marg, religious convention, one of the veiled pathways. And I looked for a while to find, and of course the scripture I found it in was very voluminous, called the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, of over 1,000 pages. And I found this quote from Divine Mother. She says, "In the age of darkness, viciousness and vile acts become the normal mode of behavior. Even the gods become deceitful. What to speak of humans and lower creatures? It is natural that it is natural that injury come to those who injure others. But when peaceful persons, devoid of enmity, are injured, that is an act of wickedness, pure and simple. In such an age, one will find very few persons following the true religion. So, as a statement and decree by Sri Durga in the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, one of the two great mother scriptures of the world, both of them found in India, we find this statement of basically a description of the Kali Yuga. So that's the four veiled doorways. It's an easy study, but it gives you a look into like a four-faceted society in any given culture or country of today. And you'll find people walking along either one of them or a combination. I mean, there might be a person who's very materialistic who still goes to church, but has a very narrow idea that my country and my religion are right. And over there, we're going to go bomb them. Pretty soon, I want them dead. I want them out of so I can enjoy all the materialism. So there's a big admixture of evil acts, he said here, viciousness and vile acts, and also, these very narrow ideas, like God bless America and nowhere else. One of those statements we had come up recently. When all souls are the children, sons and daughters of the Lord and Mother of the universe, all souls. If you follow below that golden line, following the Adharma descent, we call it, then you have the four fundamental paths of life. Another teaching that's rather separate to the four veiled doorways, but I wanted to put them side by side because they fall into a threefold level of philosophy. They're either, hugging very close to the path of Advaita or dualism, or they're beginning to mature more into Vishishta Dvaita, which is, of course, Dharma teachings, like we're trying to give out, and also bridging the non-dual Advaita. So Vyavaharika, the worldly path, is the first one up here. And Shankara mentions it in his Vivekachudamani by saying, meditation on the meaning of truth as it is taught in the Vedanta leads to the highest illumination. By this means, the misery of worldly life, Vyavaharika, is destroyed altogether. It's almost like our theme here of Sri Ramakrishna saying, if you recognize Maya, it ceases to exist. So it really never had existence in the first place. But you're going against the grain of billions of souls at the collective, individual and collective level who are under the influence of the 10 characteristics of Maya, the 7 malas, and the 16 evolutes. And that's ingrained in the souls of this ilk, ingrained in them. So it would be very hard to talk them out of, what was it teaching here? Being attached to their attachments. Very hard to talk them out of that. So you actually have like 2 levels of gloom. Vivekananda said they pile more gloom on gloom in his Song of the Sannyasin. This thirst for life, forever quenched, it drags from birth to death, and death the soul, from birth to death, and death to birth the soul. But they conquer all who conquer self. Therefore that thou art, he says. So in this case, it would be very hard to get people out of the first level of gloom, which is attachment to their attachments. If you were to get them out of that attachment, then you've got their attachments exposed. And that's the case of a person following the four veiled doorways and working their way over to a more qualified non-dualistic or non-dualistic understanding. The 3 tiers of philosophy, Vivekananda calls it. So religion and philosophy, 2 wings of the bird again, kind of analogy we can use. So here is, after Vyavaharika, is Advaita, path of dualism. Then yoga, the path of transformation. So those are number 2 and 3 paths of the 4 fundamental paths of life. So these are much more sweet, much more inspiring, much more attracting than what you've been through before and the ordinary run of souls who are narrow, fundamentalist, materialistic only, sensually based. You'll see why they are when we get to the 16 evolutes of Maya. Because Maya is one thing, but it's evolutes. It creates more of itself. That was one of its characteristics, right? It creates more of itself. So in the case of Advaita, path of dualism, then you have some very sweet bhakti. You'd say the path of devotion and bhakti really permeates the path of dualism because you're loving God. You're loving him, her as something other than yourself and as a form in dualism, mostly. So that's, you might say, the 2 limitations of that path as far as the Advaitists are concerned, or those who love the formless, because love is love. Nonetheless, in Advaita, you get a chance to work out your karmas. You get a chance to follow the dharmic path rather than the adharmic path, and maybe have a chance of realizing your swadharma even, which we'll look at in a second. And how do you do that? Yoga. Not yoga as union, but yoga as practice. So again, in yoga you have to look at it in 2 ways. There's the yogis who are trying to perfect themselves or realize their innate perfection, as the Advaitist would say. They're doing it through practice. And that's how we started off this class, talking about convincing a person to follow the instructions of what they hear rather than just hearing and going away. In the case of the world, I mean, you might say some of the people who walk away after hearing the teachings are following these paths. And they're really not getting very much deeper lifetime to lifetime. You don't see them transforming at the end of their lifetime, or during their lifetime. So it's like Vishishta, talking about that. If you don't get peace of mind somewhere in your life, if you reach the end of your life and you haven't gained peace of mind, then something was wrong earlier in your life. So he thinks that ordinary life, that is, spontaneous natural life, should lead to peace of mind by the time you're old. What does it lead to? Shankara says in Bhaja Govindam. I could even sing it for you. It leads to brooding on decay and the march of diseases, old age, and fear of death is what most old people are thinking about. And it's on their mind all the time. So this illumined souls are much different than that. Their minds are always very free and clear of all that. Get thee behind me, Jesus said. And that's not a horned, tailed devil with a pitchfork that you have to get behind you, because it's all insentient, it's ephemeral, it's illusory. So you get it behind you because you're clinging to it as if it were real when it's not. I mean, that's why great souls sing about that. For instance, in the Hastamalaka Stotram. Mukha basako darpane drishamano mukhatvam pritatvena naishvasti vastu chidabasako desha jivo pitadvat Sanicca palabdis swarupahamatma yata darpana bhava abhasahano mukam vidyate kalpana hinamekam tata divyoge nirabhasa koyaha Sanicca palabdis swarupahamatma Sanichopalabdhi Swarupahamatma. In just two of his verses, Hasta Amalaka, this truth should be as clear to you as a fruit in the palm of your hands, is what that means. And he was named Hasta Amalaka. Don't get me started, there are beautiful stories about him meeting Shankara, the great Advaitin. But in these verses, he sings, and we're not sure if Hasta Amalaka wrote this or if Shankara wrote this after he met Hasta Amalaka, but he sings, as a reflection in a mirror is identical with the object reflected, so is the universe identical with the self, revealed in the mirror of pure mind. Thus are living beings perfect images of the eternal subject, the undying self. And that limitless self am I, identical with the Supreme Being. He goes on, remove the reflective surface and the form disappears. What remains is the formless essence, the objectless reality. Like this, when the external mind is stilled and focused on reality, what is left is oneness, the eternal abode, my true existence. So, written from a standpoint of full realization after having met Shankara, the great Acharya, Shankaracharya they call him, and then the result of that is writing what they call a stotram. So you have in India, of course, the sort of tired old ho-hum kirtan, which we've kind of become obsessed with in the West. But then you have these beautiful, inspirational, devotional wisdom songs, lexics, and our founder used to call them, called bhajans. But then you find out when you're in India and you're interested in that kind of thing, all sing you a stotram. Oh, what's a stotram? And there's this beautiful non-dual hymns, like classical, kind of semi-classical hymns with, as far as the music's concerned, like a ghazal. Sometimes there's another very beautiful kind of musical composition. But the stotrams are always singing non-duality. You won't find anything about personal worship of personal God or Ram or Krishna or anything like that in them. It's just like, from the standpoint of non-dual realization, this is what we know. And I'll give you another example of it here, as we're on the subject. Nirmula mula rahito Hisadoditoham Nirtoma dhoma rahito Hisadoditoham Nirdipa dipa rahito Hisadoditoham Gyanamritam samarasam Gaganopamoham Nishkama kama ihanama katam vadami Nisanga sangam ihanama katam vadami Nisharasara rahitam jakatam vadami Gyanamritam samarasam Gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam Gaganopamoham. So this is a stotram from the Evolutes, another class of realized being who has that non-dual, which is what we're leading here to of explanation. Non-dual realization, Advaitic they call it. And he sings, pertinent very much, his very first sutra or sloka or verse in this composition is about this very subject. But he approaches it from a unique way. I am a create, distinct from worlds projected by the mind. Say no, I won't. Let's just go meditate on that, right? I am ever present, never obscured by clouds of my covering, conjured by ignorance. I am the light shining in other objects, self-luminous. I am pure existence, equanimity, and ecstasy, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. So how can it be said that Brahman has desires or has none? It is outright persiflage to call that attached or unattached. Similarly, in the end, it is futile reasoning to label it real or unreal. I only know that I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So, just 2 of 40. This is a Chalisa, it's called. You'll find those 2 verses in the 2nd chapter of the Avadhuta Gita. Verses 3 through 43, that's 40 verses of him singing about his realizations at the level of non-duality. So, wanted to share with you some stotrams that have to do, and you can see how they deal in their own unique way with Maya. He mentions it there. And from the standpoint of, I'm having none of it, thank you. And he doesn't even mention method, like, oh, I got over it by this and such and that, because it was never real to begin with. So I'm just myself. And how do I describe myself? Well, how about Satchidananda? I'm pure existence, pure knowledge, pure bliss. Unalloyed, uninterrupted. I like to put those 2 English words in there. Unalloyed means it doesn't have any admixture of any kind in it coming from Maya or from duality and qualified duality. And it's uninterrupted for a change, you know. And when you talk to sannyasins of India, like I have, and I've been very fortunate to know several dozen of them, some of them very closely, the swamis of the Ramakrishna order or sannyasins. When you talk with them, that's really the one thing that bothers them. Interrupted bliss. They don't want that. And you see how, even without looking at all that Maya contains and what people suffer in these other paths, it gets down to a very, very refined point. Is that, oh, that little bit of Maya got in and interrupted my bliss. And that hurts. You don't know how much it hurts here because it's always on you. You've taken Maya like a net in your mouth and dived into the mud with the net in your mouth thinking you're safe. And then you're just all suffering. So suffering somehow turns to pleasure, or pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain. But if you've had bliss or higher samadhi, seated samadhi in yoga, and all of a sudden you reach the seatless samadhi and you have that I am, as he says here. He starts out the very first verse with 2 words, I am. And then he puts a create after it. Not created. Neither born, nor living, nor dying. Eternal. So if anything gets in that even bespeaks of a slight interruption to that, that's what they don't like, I've found out. I want my bliss unalloyed and uninterrupted, and that's what beings have attained. So that's why I'm not settling for anything else. No wooden nickels for me, please. That's the authentic article, and I'm that, and nothing can get in the way of that anymore. And I can be free of birth and death with that, or I can come back again. It doesn't matter. I can be a monk, a householder, a merchant, as the earlier stotram I was singing from declared in 1 verse. And it won't matter because that realization is unalloyed and uninterrupted. To finish off this chart, I could say a lot about yoga as practice, but come to a retreat or look back on some of our classes that have to do with Raja Yoga, the eight-limbed yoga. And particularly the upper limbs of it, the samadhis by which, having attained, these beings have been able to say this with such force in Sanskrit, and even thousands of years later carry over into the English with that surprising, hypnotizing statement of non-duality. So you have the hypnotization of Maya, but you have also the hypnotization of Advaita. You're going to have to get rid of this charm by this higher charm. So basically, where was that? I was thinking it's worthy of going back and talking about. Oh, yes, it's here. I want to read you this quote. Maya pervades everything, and its axle of delusion is the human mind. Destroy Maya with pure Maya. The Guru's words are pure Maya. So, getting the Dharmic transmission, getting the wisdom transmission. A transmission, I have a new chart I'm formulating in my mind that is not formulating on the axle of Maya, it's forming on the axle of Jnanam. And it's about this transmission and how it takes place, how it actually takes place from stage to stage in people. So that you're not just hearing some words or getting a discourse and walking away, or understanding it, doing a little manana on it, and then saying, well, okay, that's enough, go on to the next thing. But you're actually absorbing it like you absorb food into your bloodstream and into your organs. The food becomes one with you and necessary for your sustenance. In the same way, transmission brings that non-dual wisdom to bear in the human mind and gets rid of the axle of delusion. So I like that quote about Guru's words being the higher Maya and hearing them getting rid of the lower Maya. So one more thing to say on this chart. This series of 3 classes, you can see, is probably working out nicely to be set up so the last class will be able to take these 16 evolutes and inform ourselves of how to, of the condition people are in, like Lord Brahma putting Vishishta into the curse of Maya for a few minutes, or however long that was, because time goes away, as it were. So here's where we would segue to the 8 limbs of yoga, everything they mean, whole retreat on it, maybe weeks of studying Raja Yoga, or Patanjala, named after Lord Patanjali, affectionately called the father of yoga. But we will not pause there. We will go to the 4th fundamental pathway of life, which is the way of non-dual abidance, or Advaita. Shiva has been noted to say in the scriptures, the true renouncer, called the great actor, the great enjoyer, has transcended both dharma and adharma and gotten free of birth and death. So he is along the Swadharma path, and will come lifetime to lifetime. Will move from life to life, and without ever being born and without ever suffering the idea of death. There's a stotram I can sing you that has that verse in it. Namrichor nashanka, name jati beda. That means I have no birth, I have no death, I have no father, no mother, because nirvana, because I am Shiva. So a good way to refer to the greatest actor and greatest enjoyer and greatest pretender is also in that teaching by the Lord Shiva, who's the dissolver of worlds of time and space, and name and form, into non-dual reality. That is, if dissolution is necessary for beings who want to reach enlightenment. For those souls, of course, all is enlightenment, and the projection, the sustenance, and the dissolution is all in play. It's just like Tempest in a teapot is a nice way of saying that. So many billions of souls all up in arms and up in excitement and up in suffering about all of this. But to those, it's just a tempest in a teapot, see? I poured some water in there, it swirls, it's over. A little steam just let off, you see. Then there's the tanmatra, the flavor coming off of it. See, so just nothing. And I was the soul that watched the beginning, the middle, and the ending of it without ever changing. That's my true nature. Why? Because I am pure existence, pure wisdom, and pure bliss, boundless as the sky, infinite like space. And one more quote to read you as we end this chart. Lord Vashishta says, along that Swadharma pathway, the intrepid spiritual wayfarer who inquires into the wise characteristics of Dharma treads the proper path. He learns concentration and meditation, the significance of the scriptures, discrimination between the real and the unreal, and knows what actions are to be done and which are not to be done. If you're in any doubt about that, just read the Bhagavad Gita and the teachings on karma, akarma, and vikarma by Sri Krishna, the three kinds of karma, three dynamics, you might say, of karma. The four types, the four colors, the three dynamics. I think I've put those all into charts. Then we, in the time remaining, which is somewhat substantial, I'd like to take you on to see and make sure I covered everything. There wasn't some more. Yes, we covered that. This I wanted to say and read about the three gates. The Divine Mother of the Universe, who contains these four marvelous Shaktis, Icha, Jnana, Kriya, and Drauvya, permeates the creation through two basic modes, Vijay Shakti and Avijay Shakti. The first is the power of ascension, which takes all aspiring beings to desire, who desire to free themselves from cyclic rounds in birth and death in ignorance towards remembrance and realization of their true nature. This is Vijay Shakti, which propels the revealing subtler and subtler gradations of higher knowledge leading to Paravidya. That's describing this whole thing that just, if you were to take many lifetimes as an illumined soul, you'd just be going around in your own cycle. These cycles are fraught with 7 malas, 10 characteristics, 16 evolutes, and they take forever. It's called samsara, or in the earliest days, samsara pragbara. But these souls also kind of have their own cycle if they're bodhisattvas and jivanmuktas. They're coming back not only to perfect more and more of the pure lands that they're trying to attain. Maybe some of them are past masters who have already attained them, but it's always on the force of Vijay Shakti that they're returning to their true nature. Vijay Shakti here in the lower worlds would be prana. In the lowest world it would be ragged and broken prana, no energy, energy going nowhere, or energy that's gotten into the hands of materialists in order to make bombs and do destruction, to blunder. And then about Paravidya, it contains the teachings of the divine incarnations, the truth of the scriptures, the words of the Guru, and the very presence of the Wisdom Mother. Many of these mentioned right here. It has been described as divine recognition, called Pratyabhigya by the ancients. Pratyabhigya is a famous teaching in Tantra. And so if you have divine recognition, smriti, smriti shuddha, they would call it in another darshana, then you're from lifetime to lifetime remembering your divine nature. And so that's an unalloyed, uninterrupted remembrance that you have. It's constantly giving you peace, at the very least, peace of mind all the time. otherwise impetus for Advaitic realization, as we sang about. It encompasses, that means pratyabhigya, it encompasses everything one needs to know for liberation, namely the knowledge of what the world represents, awareness of the immortal self within, called Atman, and realization of Brahman. For those who are still bereft of this divine recognition, pratyabhigya, it is necessary to rid the mind of the influences of Maya and transcend Maya. So other darshanas and tantra get into the act with what is taught. And then going on to explain Vijay Shakti, it's the downward moving force, and it accommodates all souls who desire to follow the way of Vyavaharika. Maya will accommodate that through Vijay Shakti. And that's why I'm reading this, because we're falling into Vijay Shakti's influence, suffering the seven malas, and falling under the powers of Avarana and Vikshepa, and all under the auspice of Vijay Shakti. You know what's coming next. Sri Ramakrishna says, Avijja Shakti is more powerful than Vijay Shakti. So ignorance is more powerful than knowledge, and that's a reference to this world, Bur Loka, physical world, the earth and its peoples. Here, Vijay Shakti is more powerful than knowledge. Well, what about those people who are following knowledge? They're not. They're following secular knowledge. That's not knowledge. So we have some arguments, some debates, some contentions to bring up if you think you're a knowledgeable person. It's probably your ego that thinks it's knowledgeable, but we know that the ego is a part of Maya. It's inflated, and it's giving you a wrong reading about nature and about true wisdom. So let's talk about true knowledge. That's why Paravidya is true knowledge, and a Paravidya leads otherwise. You can see then the connections between the four veiled doorways, the fundamental pathways, and what Maya is doing behind the scenes of them to all sorts of people on them. So if you think lower knowledge, what we call Paravidya, is the ultimate thing, then we're saying you're caught in Maya. You're fallen into its auspices. And who are you going to call? Call the Avatut, or call Hasta Amalaka. Either by the phone, if you're living in a technological age, or by meditation, and find out what he wants to tell you about the difference between Parashakti, or Paravidya and Aparavidya, or Mahashakti and Maya. Higher Maya and lower Maya. Inform yourself. To facilitate the darker, denser aspects of Maya, Vijay Shakti breaks into two further powers called Avarana and Vikshepa, distorting and veiling power. The former suited for veiling reality, and the latter effective in distorting it. By gunas, you can call those tamas and rajas. Under the regime of these two powers, and bereft of Vijay Shakti and its free and willing aid, human beings struggle helplessly against the many weights and chains of Avidya Shakti, which adversely affect their physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. It's unarguable when you look at the world that this is the case. Whether you accept this particular definition or explanation or version of it, it's up to you. If you want to go somewhere else and try and find a good explanation for Maya in a world that doesn't even have a word for it, go ahead. But you could look at the ancient wisdom and find out the reasons why people are suffering, and this will segue to our class next Sunday about how they suffer and what they suffer under. It's studyable. It's scrutinizable. You see, you can actually pick it out and see it, and avail yourself of the knowledge of it so you can help your family, your mother, your father, your brother, your husband, your children, out of these habits that they formed in Maya, and the rebirth that's being caused by them. This bookmark was for next week, The Evolutes of Maya. So I wanted to show you one more thing before we end this class, because there's 2 charts next week we'll look at. That is this portion of this chart, and I'll show you another chart called the subtle look at the Panchakarna of Maya. Because there are 5-fold things that Maya has in store for you too, that are good to look at. Some of them have positive ramifications, so it's good to end the series with that, because there'll be some very positive things to look at, whereas these won't seem very positive to you. But the positive things to look at under the Panchakarna of Maya, the 5-fold teachings of Maya, are very illuminating, and follow more along the line of what Vivekananda called a statement of fact. Maya is not an illusion, he said, when he came here in 1893. Some teachers had preceded him, so-called teachers, like some people in the Theosophical Society who thought they knew what they were talking about but didn't know anything about India really, and were attracted to occult things. But Vivekananda came along and said, no, what you're saying is not right. You haven't got our word Maya right. I mean, what to speak of getting it under your belt and knowing it at all from a distance and watching Maya go away and becoming an illumined soul. You haven't even got the definition of the word right. It's name and form and time and space based on causation, cause and effect. Those 5 things you're going to want to assign to the realm of Maya, because Brahman doesn't experience them. Even the stotrams are telling you that. So we'll look at that next week. In the meantime, to finish up this week's class, I wanted to show you Maya's other risky teachings. And this is called the true meaning of siddhi. We just mentioned this at the break. Siddhi could be an illumined soul, it can be an occult power, it can also be ganja, marijuana is called that. So you have to know your words and how to apply them, or you might misinterpret or text torture scriptures with wrong meanings of word in wrong places. In this case, the true meaning of siddhi is really perfection, but there's also the astabala siddhas. And so that needs to be looked at. And so, because beings like Sri Krishna and Sri Ramakrishna, like 2 bookends of Indian spirituality and on the Burloka, in the earth, have mentioned the occult powers and warned you away from them. And as I've often said, some teachers who are calling themselves Dharma teachers in the world today, I've seen there sometimes magazines, articles put out of them that you want to attain these things. And mostly, if they're a part of you, then some Maya has gotten into you, and you're going to want to get rid of those things because they keep you from enlightenment. Anima, Lagima, Vyapti, Prakamya, Mahima, Ashitva, Vashitva, and Kamavashayita are the 8 occult powers. And Krishna says about them here, you will not succeed in realizing God if you possess even one of the 8 occult powers. I don't know why, or did you read his lips? Did you read his Gita? Or what didn't you understand about his teaching that made you say that beings should seek the 8 occult powers? They won't lead you to God. There'll be a diversion, at least to that. So Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in his room. He called the young Vivekananda, who was called Narendranath, Lord of Men, into his room and said, I just wanted to let you know that some of these occult powers have come to me. I never used them, but just as a matter of gaining siddhi, I got the siddhas, you see. And so I wanted to know, I never used them, I wanted to know if you want them. I can transfer them to you. Probably hasta version of initiation. So Vivekananda thought about this, that the young Narendra thought about it, says, well, sir, will they lead me to realization of God? Will they help in my path? And Sri Ramakrishna said, no, they won't, and they might even hinder your path. Well, so Narendra said, well, then I don't want them. And then Sri Ramakrishna laughed and said, I was just testing you. And they both tested each other a lot, if you know their history. Sri Ramakrishna and the young Narendra tested each other a lot. And Sri Ramakrishna then said, a true lover does not seek anything from God except pure love. He does not seek miracles and occult powers. To such a one, the 8 occult powers, Astabala Siddhas, are like crow droppings by the side of the road. Shall we all go outside? No, I mean, there's no crows here, but there are myna birds and turkeys walking around. So we go collect some, see if they're worth having. I mean, some of their droppings. So if you got a stiff warning like that from a person who just lived in the 1800s, who knew about the Astabala Siddhas, then you'd know what to do with them, and how to stay away from them. Basically, they are clairvoyance, invasiveness and meddling into the affairs of other people. That's Vyapti. The power of all expansiveness means that you can insinuate yourself anywhere on the doings of others and have your influence. Lagima, that was 3. I started with Vyapti. Okay, well, we've done that. Please back up to 1 for me. Anima, power of invisibility. That is, how to become undetectable and to skirt responsibility. That's anima. So a lot of people love to hide out in that. Lagima is next, power of weightlessness, i.e. levitation, obsession with thinness, and so forth. So any kind of weightlessness was a power, according to the ancients, that you could do things like climb ropes and disappear in thin air and so forth. Those are the tricks of prana for the hatha yogis. So there's a whole run of teachings and things like that that are gained by Lagima. Now remember, all of these 8 are the tricks of prana, quote, the tricks of prana, unquote. So that's Sri Ramakrishna's further teaching about it. They're the tricks of prana. So if you get the prana under control, you can either use it to open up the heart chakra and get true love of God, as he says, or you can use it for occult powers. Domination, weightlessness, all expansiveness. Then prakamya, the power to fulfill your desires. And this, of course, wouldn't be in the Dharma, which is the right way of doing that. So you can even, so forth, conjure things out of thin air, as they say. Like I heard a story of one person who was with a Siddha guru, and they were going through a city, and he conjured a bottle of alcohol out of thin air. He said he saw that guru do this. And someone else conjured a bunch of sacred ash out of thin air and sprinkled it, you see, on the floor. And so these are descriptions of beings in this day and age who are Siddha gurus. And of course we use the word Siddha tongue-in-cheek there, that have these powers to pull things out of thin air, as it were. Tricks of prana. Mahima makes you able to glorify yourself, to look good in front of others. Sensation mongering and beautification would be facets of that. Ishitva is the power of domination, which I just mentioned, and I don't think anyone who's truthful or straightforward could deny that there are beings that are operating under the power of domination. in this world. In fact, maybe most all of politics is like that, and military. Why else? Is it just for protection of your country, or does it kind of eke on into that occult power of dominating over others? And of course, yes, the lucrative nature of the thing. Domination with money. And I'm going through these quick because they're sort of obvious to most of us, but it's interesting to make the connection with the 8 great accomplishments and the 3 kinds of suffering and the 6 treasures of Godhood. So I found all of these 4 systems very fascinating, each one holding a different truism and teaching, and I wanted to put them together side by side with the 8 occult powers. Vashitva is the power of attraction, so allurement with selfish motive. That's going on a lot, of course, in the minds of people. Finally, the power to really enjoy what you conjure. Kama, Vashita, enjoyment of wealth, land, and desires. And until such a time when you lose it, or it gets stolen, or you die, all of these things, of course, have these problems attached to them. Now, according to Kapila, as we come to the end of our time here, the 8 great accomplishments have 3 primary siddhis, and that's the removal of 3 types of suffering: interpersonal suffering, external suffering, and cosmic suffering. And it has 5 secondary siddhis. And the secondary siddhis, I think, are the most revealing. Dharma would be the first one. That's the kind of perfection you want. That is, pursuing a spiritual path and getting the teachings. Vijay Shakti, knowledge of the scriptures. I don't think in any lifetime, in any embodiment, you will ever be let down if you know the scriptures before you pass from this body. Especially if you know the non-dual ones. But if you've studied the Gita and Upanishads in India, then you've pretty much got the Shruti and Shravana together. You've heard what you need to hear. And if you haven't fully digested it in this lifetime, you can do it after death. Because you're not going to the realm of the ancestors anymore, or even to under the influences of gods. You're going to the land of the rishis, where your teacher came from. You see, never think of that. See? Why do I have to worry about heaven or gods? I'm going to the rishi loka. That's where my teacher came from. Of course I'm going to follow him or her. So knowledge of the scriptures sets you up for that in no uncertain terms, of course connected with Dharma. Swadhyaya is next, concentration, study. And I would add to that memorization. Because, as I say sometimes to all of you, my teacher could recite the entire Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit and in English when he was in his 90s. And I was there on hand to listen. Not just listen, by the way, but be impressed. We're very impressed down here, we can tell you. And we're going to go on and follow suit and memorize some ourselves. Sadhu Satsanga is gaining a guru, disciple, friends, and compatriots. That's better than just gaining a family and some relatives or some friends with fair faces and false hearts, as Vivekananda said. The world is full of friends with fair faces and false hearts. So what you want is, under the Dharma, under the Sangha, gaining guru, disciple, friends, and compatriots. That's a secondary siddha. It's a perfection. When you have it, you'll never want anything else again. You'll never come back to this earth wanting love from worldly people or seeking to gain something that doesn't have any value. You'll be born with those souls around you. And if you're not, you'll find them very soon. And then you'll go, oh, thank the Lord, I found these people. And you'll know what true love is, because Sri Ramakrishna just said it for us. A true lover does not seek anything from God but pure love. The 8th and final, the 5th of the 5 secondary perfections is achieve self-purification. That's a dharmic teaching. How do you do it? purify your location. And we'll show you how to do that. If you want to follow the vein of the first half of this class where I'm saying, we'll give you the instructions and help you carry them through. So purify your location. Come and live with us and see how we eat pure food, how we breathe in pure air, how we do pure acts, how we think purely, and how Maya has no place in our ashrams or in our homes or with our Sangha, hopefully. Kriya Shuddha is the second of purifications, purity of action. See how you dedicate a life to the well-being of all other souls. And Chit Shuddhi, purity of mind, coveted most highly by realized souls. If you have purity of mind, purity of action and purity of location will come with you and follow you all the days of every lifetime. You won't have to go seeking them in any lifetime, though. Here I am, I was waiting for you. And then you have Kapila's teaching along with Lord Buddha's teaching of the Trividham Dukkam, the three kinds of suffering. Caused by mind, caused internally, and then by natural forces like diseases and so forth. Now what I really wanted to do, and we only have a few minutes to do it because we'll let you look at that on your own. Maybe we can take it up at the beginning of next week's class if it applies. But I really wanted to put next to the 8 occult powers these 6 perfections of the Godhood, which is a beautiful teaching in Vedanta. That is, you want to really know what power is. It's aligned with peace, not with domination and the other things which you've seen here in this quick study of the Asta Bala Siddhas. So there you see God's treasures are Shri, opulence or infinity. Everything is there, belongs to the Lord, and through His Shakti, in 4 different ways, can give it to you. Abundance of knowledge, abundance of ability to produce things in the dharmic way rather than in a selfish way. Across the board, I have another chart that puts these across the board with one another. And also the power to cause yourself to listen and follow the will of the Lord. Not my will, but thy will be done, Sri Ramakrishna say. Not I, me, and mine, thou, thee, and thine. I've heard that he could say that in English, and those are the only English words he had that he knew. Not I, me, and mine, thou, thee, and thine. So this was his motto. This was his credo. And so that's the difference, really, you might see overall between the ego and its want of power and the true lover of God, the true knower of God, the true follower of God, is these 6 treasures of Godhead. Let the mother give them to you by qualifying yourself for them, and quit seeking crow droppings. Bala, glory, power. There's a kind of glory up here again. You see the glorification, we went through it. But the glory of God and its power is infinite and for the highest good of all beings. Just look at Sri Krishna in the Gita and how he says, I've attained everything here. Now I only come back in each lifetime to lifetime for Loka Sangraha. I want all beings to awaken to the highest truth. So, and through the glory, any glory and power that attends upon the avatar, will use that for the highest good of beings, like Sri Ramakrishna using it without owning anything but a loincloth for himself. And his order of swamis that came later under the auspice of Vivekananda, the same. Not owning a thing, no family, and no home, no property. Have thou no home, what home can hold thee, friend? The sky thy roof, the grass thy bed, and food what chance will bring, is how they had that idea in their heads when they were wandering sannyasins. Finally, in the remaining minutes, Aishvarya is strength and lordship, And that's, of course, benign lordship, not selfish lordship, that you will get from the asuras, and sometimes from even the gods. Because remember what Holy Mother said to us in this other chart back here, on the Gateways chart. In an age of deceit and vile selfishness, even the gods get imbalanced. Why shouldn't they? Because they're in you and you got imbalanced. So aren't you kind of giving them selfish offerings? You're not giving them pure offerings, so they get imbalanced. They're the gods of your senses. They're the gods of your mind. They're the gods of your intelligence and so forth. And they're not getting what they want from you, so from outside in, you're enacting a kind of corruption on them. And even nature will strike back at you because of that. Not just the gods, but the gods of nature will also come down on you for that. Tejas is splendor, radiance. Get that from Viveka Guru. He will give you Tejas by presence, by teaching, by transmission. Maybe I can have that chart done by next week, transmission chart. And it's a kind of radiance, like tanmatric radiance that comes off of everyone, Vivekananda said. And especially off of good people. I mean, that's why when someone walks in the room who's vicious and vile, everyone who has any kind of consciousness kind of avoids, you see, backs off, carries a bad vibration, as they say. But it's opposite of good people, and even better than good people, because you have to go from good to better to best, Vivekananda has said. So you meet a Lexixin in your life, like we did our SRV founder here, peace and bliss be upon him. Then you find someone who's gone from good to better and to best, and you welcome that being into any room or atmosphere. Everyone wants to see him. Only problem is that when he goes away, you get mad. Where'd he go? I saw people love Lexixin. Even Christian ministers fell in love with him within 2 hours of sitting with him. And I've seen this happen with my own eyes, but then when he leaves, everyone goes, was all upset because God came into their life and left. So, very beautiful presence of Tejas coming off of them. And in the final minute here, Vijnana is a treasure of the Godhead, wisdom or truth. And finally, Chaga, renunciation and transcendence is given a huge, high platform in India, foretold by the appearance of detachment and discernment as a practice, a mental practice. Then comes mature renunciation and transcendence, to return to your true nature. I think I've covered all the quotes on here, and I've also taken us through everything except Trividam Dukkam. So we'll see if that comes up next week. But now we need to move towards our close with an ancient Sanskrit chant of wisdom. Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamoya Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamaya Abira Bira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from the unreal to the real. And lead us from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.